Hey everyone, Works here. So there's been a lot of talk about kind of really two major topics in the WoW community when it comes to the currently ongoing Midnight Alpha testing cycle. One is add-ons. I'm working on concreting my thoughts more on add-ons, and I'll probably do a video on it. But I wanted today to talk about the class changes. So I've got here in front of me, and on the screen here, you can see the initial alpha dev notes that came out. And one of the things that a lot of people noticed is that there are some classes that are seeing a huge amount of talents removed. Obviously, I'm just looking at DK here. So for example, quick number look, you look at this, 11 talents for Blood Decay have been removed. This was a active talent. I believe that one was an active talent. Bone Storm definitely was an active talent. Rune Tap was an active talent. Tombstone was an active talent. So they lost quite a bit of active abilities. So Button Bloat basically was removed. And if you look at the rest of the stuff that was added, you know, these new talents, that's a passive. That's a passive. This is a passive. This is a passive, this is a passive, this is a passive. This has been redesigned to become an empower ability, which is going to be interesting to see. And they updated some additional talents. So they removed, for example, from Blood, like 5 active abilities, and then all the new talents that came in were passive effects. Unholy's hard to judge because like they completely got basically reworked from the ground up, and a lot of the talents that were removed involved the wound mechanic. So like Bursting Sores, Apocalypse, Eternal Agony, Festermite, Improved Festering Strike, Pestilence. All of those touched on wound-based talents, and now that wounds are no longer part of the Unholy play loop, it makes sense for those to go. When you're talking disease-based stuff, I mean, it's Deathraunt, Decomp, Devile, Legion of Souls, technically. Pestilence, it's technically a D&D-based talent. But Plaguebringer got gone, Rotten Touch got gone, Unholy Blight got gone, which was an active button for passive, and then Soul Reaper is gone as well, because I don't think most DKs liked Soul Reaper. You know, but I could look at almost any class and go, like, I'm just gonna scroll down to about halfway down this bar here. Let's see what class it lands on. I think it's Mage. Oh, Monk. Cool. But like, if you look at Monk, for example, like in the class tree, they lost, you know, they removed like basically 1 talent purely, and then 2 they got adjusted. You know, for Brewmaster, they lost, well, that's 9 talents. Mistweaver got a soft rework. They lost 4 talents. You know, Windwalker lost a bunch of talents. So, like, you can look almost any class, and a bunch of them lost 5+ talent nodes. Most specs did. And so the question and the main conspiracy theory is that they're trying to prep WoW for consoles. I don't think that is actually true, because if they were prepping WoW for consoles, abilities like Heroic Leap, Ring of Peace, well, they removed Firestorm, but like Firestorm, they've added Blizzard to being now castable on your target, but they still give you the option for ground reticle based stuff. Like, if they were doing things like that, if they were trying to put WoW to consoles, ground reticles wouldn't exist in the way that they do. Because it's like, if your left thumbstick is movement, you know, in 8 cardinal directions, and then right thumbstick controls your camera, you don't have a way to be able to actively place a ground targeting mechanic with the way that WoW is built. So I don't think the console thing is real. I think they just took this opportunity to kind of rebuild WoW without rebuilding, you know, out of a brand new engine. Please no Unreal 5 WoW. Unreal 5 is been really bad for game releases. Between the add-on situation, between the class changes that they're making, I think Blizzard finally looked at their gameplay, looked at a lot of the feedback, and said, okay, it's time to kind of, and with the stat squish coming, they looked at everything and said, okay, it's about time to burn things to the ground and start rebuilding from the ground up. None of that full scorched earth, because like all 40 specs didn't get reworked. I would argue only about 7 to 8 did, which is still a lot for a WoW expansion. A lot of them just took a lot of the junk that was sitting out there and condensed them into a much more straightforward approach. And this has caused a combination of reactions. There are people that absolutely love this approach because they felt like WoW had gotten too complicated. They had been playing through, like, say, Mist of Pandaria or even, WoD, where all of a sudden it just felt like there were so many buttons. Like, I have a Logitech G600 mouse, and on my Druid and on my Monk, and even to a lesser extent on my Warrior, I fill every single one of those side buttons. So, the game has had a ton of keybinds for a long time. It has had a lot of modifiers that aren't clear, and a lot of different stuff to track. So, for example, on Warrior, I would have to get, a week or a pack to basically track when I should Bloodthirst on Fury, or when I should execute on Warrior, on Arms Warrior. I have to track my Juggernaut duration so that I can maximize my execute damage. I have to track the amount of buffs that my Mortal Strike or Cleave have as an Arms Warrior. I have to track the crit percentage of my Bloodthirst. I have to track the number of attacks that are going to be cleaved off of my improved Whirlwind. On Prot Warrior, I have to track my shield block time. I have to track my Ignore Pain amount. I have to know the CDs of all of my defensives. I have to know when I'm going to get my Strategist proc so that I'm getting a free Ignore Pain, so I don't waste Rage on Ignoring Pain and instead use it on Revenge. So there's just a lot of things, even within a class that I think is not overly complicated, like Warrior, that you have to track. Now think of something like Mage, where you are tracking, for example, on Frost, which is the only spec I have real experience on. You have mirror images, you have Ice Cold, you have Greater Invis, you have barriers, you have your mass barriers, you have your Alter Time, you have your Fingers of Frost, you have your Flurry, you have your Glacial Spike setup, you have your freezing stacks. You only get 2 of those on every Flurry. You have to track that. You have to do the interactions with casting an Ice Frostbolt into a Flurry so that you actually can get 3 charges of the freezing stack. You have to know your stats getting up to a certain percentage before you start to cap on your crit. You move on to other stats. Like, there is just so much that goes into a lot of these classes that even for someone like me that loves class gameplay, a lot of the times all I was doing was grabbing a build off of WoW, plugging it in, and then just playing it. And unless I started taking that class more seriously, I just never changed it. And I can understand why the people that think why they think that a lot of these specs were getting overly complex. On the flip side, there are people that are quite upset about this because they feel like classes, there's going to be no more skill expression. Like, the difference between a really good BM hunter and the average BM hunter versus a new BM hunter, that gap was somewhat significant. And I use BM hunter as an example because it is widely seen as one of the easiest specs to pick up and play. Whereas the gap between like a really good Preservation Evoker versus the average Devastation Evoker or Preservation Evoker like myself, and a bad Preservation Evokers was very significant. And I've literally talked to people in my own guild. I'm like, hey, why don't you try this spec on your class? And they're like, because it seems way too hard. Like, now, obviously right now Destro is really good. But like last tier, I was talking to one of our warlocks where Demonology was very good. And I said, why don't you pick up Demonology? Like, it's a pretty straightforward spec, honestly. And they were like, no, I don't want to have to do all the demon tracking. Fair. You know, and I can't argue that because, like, yeah, I don't think of it that much because I played Demonology quite a bit for fun, and I kind of understand, you know, demon tracking and how to set up a good tyrant and stuff like that. You know, but I look at, like, Mage, and outside of Frost, I bounce off of it almost every tier because I just don't understand. Arcane, I've never quite understood how it fully functions and how to maximize it, and Fire, I've kind of always just kind of hated the design of have a strong combustion window or you suck. So, like, I kind of get it, but a lot of people feel like that skill expression that, you know, if they put time practicing a class, it's going to be gone. I'm on the side of, I think this is fundamentally a good thing for the health of WoW going into both Midnight and for the remaining World Soul Saga, and for whatever stories they want to tell after. The reason that I'm on this side of things is because as someone that does like to play multiple classes, it's going to be better for me, for sure. But as someone that doesn't take all the time to sit down and master every aspect of their class, because some of it's degenerate and I just don't like the gameplay loops that are involved in it, a lot of those degenerate gameplay loops are being destroyed. Which means that the floor for all specs has just been raised. So, like, the baseline thing that any person can do has just been raised. Now, a lot of people are arguing, oh, it's because they want to push one button rotation. I don't think that's the case. I still think that one button rotation is going to be a significant hindrance to most specs. And maybe this is me being a little optimistic, but I mean, we just are a week into the alpha cycle at this point. Like, we're still on the first round of class changes. There hasn't been any adjustments beyond the initial testing that's been done, and I don't think we're going to see anything for at least another week. But I don't think this is, again, a conspiracy theory that they want to push one button rotation onto everyone and remove the skill expression from the game. I doubt that's going to be the case. I think you're still going to see the best PvPers, the best raiders, the best Mythic Plusers in the world do things on their class that, you know, your average player is not going to be able to do. And I don't say average in terms of skill, I just say average in terms of lifestyle. You know, someone, you know, I'm obviously in between jobs, but I was working, you know, quote unquote a 9 to 5, even though I worked 7 to 4. But I worked, you know, a Monday through Friday job. I have a kid on the weekends that I see every other weekend through my co-parenting setup right now. I have other bills that I'm paying for, and then I try to do stuff like make content as a fun side job. So I try to spread my passions around. I just simply don't have the time, more so now, but I didn't have the time to sit down and spend 2 hours at a target dummy learning every intricacy of Arms Warrior. And to maximize the class, you were kind of being forced in that direction. Now that floor has been lifted. A lot of the nitpicky micromanaging things are being removed. They're taking less cognitive load off of your gameplay and putting it more into encounter design, which I think is okay. I think there are going to be people that are going to min-max their class play gameplay no matter what. They're just people that are hardwired. They've hardwired themselves that way through years of conditioning. I don't think that's a bad. I also don't think it's something that we should doom about too much. Now, there obviously are some specs that we need to really kind of pay attention to. Resto Shaman, I think, is probably everyone's biggest one that they're kind of pointing to right now as like a quote-unquote failure to design. But if you read this dev note, it says, a significant change here is the removal of Healing Surge and Tidal Waves. We are reducing the base cast time of Healing Wave and Chain Heal to simplify gameplay, adding options for mana management through talents for situation where it feels valuable. We recognize there is a loss of decision point when doing single target healing. We'll be monitoring feedback closely when it comes to Healing Surge to be removed. But our goal is to keep the spell decision making simple because healing already has a dynamic gameplay with target choice. So basically what they're saying is that, like, hey, we get that this is a thing, but we want to try and simplify this decision. But it also very much infers that they're leaving the door open for that to come back. And so it's a situation where I think that for the most part, like, they're taking the approach, and I think they're doing this with add-on restriction as well, where they're kind of cutting too much off, knowing that they can just tack back on and glue it back together seamlessly as they need to. And so I think that for an alpha cycle where they're kind of taking this really a brand new approach to WoW, I think it's a good thing overall. Does this mean skill expression is going to be removed? In some ways, yes. It is inevitable when they're making this level of class changes. I mean, I think every spec, except for maybe Frost DK, has gotten like 15 plus notes, you know, combined with the specs that got completely reworked. So they're reworking Demonology because of the add-on situation. They reworked developers to bring back UA and Seed of Corruption as their primary spenders. They reworked Unholy Death Knight completely. I would argue that all of them, you know, that Windwalker got a soft rework. Removing a lot of the floating modifiers that go out there. Fury Warrior got a lot of changes that I think we need to continue to iterate on, but Arms Warrior got rid of a lot of floating modifiers and cooldown stacking. You know, things that, like, when you play the spec long enough, it all makes sense, but when you are picking up a spec, it can be very discouraging to play. And I think making all classes and all specs more approachable to both new players, which a lot of people think this is only targeted at them, that is not the case. I think these changes are more targeted at current players. If you're like me, I love to play alts. You know, I've got 3 characters that I'm trying to get to 3k. My warrior's there, my druid is close, and my demon hunter is not far behind them. I play at least 2 specs on all 3 of those classes. You know, I am someone that enjoys that type of variety when playing the game. And for me, this is exciting because picking up and learning a class that I want to maybe learn, especially if I'm looking to progress up the guild ranks or push another key level or 2. You know, these are the types of things where if I want to just re-roll to try and pick something that's going to better fit the group comps that I'm in, I'm going to be able to do that with a much lower ceiling in terms of learning the basic functions of the class. Now, things like gearing and things like that are always going to be in the way, but this is an MMO. That is part of the process. And even that climb is much less steep than it has been in years past. So I think this is overall a good thing. That doesn't mean every single spec is going to be very functional the way that it is, and we should give feedback on that. Like, I know Shadow Priests aren't too thrilled, obviously Restless Shaman aren't too thrilled, Fire Mages are not too thrilled right now because they feel like they got cut back almost too much, which, reading over the fire changes, I actually agree with, and I hope Blizzard takes that feedback into consideration and continues to tack maybe a little bit more back into the class. What I don't want to happen is I don't want rotations to be classic WoW rotations. Alright? Before you classic Andes come at me, rotations in classic WoW were boring. Let's be real. Alright, I can still quote you the Combat Rogue rotation, and I haven't played Combat Rogue in 20 years. Like, that's how dull, repetitive, and boring those rotations are. And some specs are maybe currently playing that way, Fire Mage I think being the big one. But I don't think that we need to force people into tracking 11 different buffs on your character just so that you can get the precise time to Arcane Barrage. That is nuts. That is unfun. That is not healthy. And so I think we're finally at a point where Blizzard recognizes there needs to be a bit of balance added to it, and I think they're taking those steps and approach to do that. So I'm on the side of I think these class changes are healthy. I don't think they've gone too far overall. On individual specs, they probably have, but that's where grabbing constructive feedback from those that are playing alpha are required, and a lot of people are sitting there going, oh, Blizzard never listens to the feedback. Well, if you never give it, they have nothing to listen to. Let's be real. And we're already seeing them listening to feedback in the add-on realms by recognizing that their current locking of the box, so to speak, is probably being too restrictive at this moment. But I think it's because they are very definitively trying to test their own shit that they're implementing. So I think classes are going to end up being the same way. If there's something that doesn't work, we still have a bunch of Apex talents that are in. There's a bunch of NYI talent nodes across all the classes. Demon Hunter, I think in particular, obviously, because they're adding a new spec to it. And so there's a lot of time still to give that consistent cycle. Now, I'm not sitting, or consistent feedback rather. I'm not saying sit on your hands and wait, but because even if you're not in alpha, like I can read the Windwalker notes and kind of see a couple of issues already with the specs. And I've done that, and I believe I did that in my Monk video. But like I am someone, obviously I know a lot about Warrior, so I can look at these and say, hey, I don't think this works. Or this gameplay loop, when I look at it, is going to be very strange. Fury in particular, I think, kind of just needs to be rethought again. That said, I like the armor style that changes so far. The Warrior class tree changes, I think, for the most part, are fine. I don't think they're perfect, and I'm going to continue to give feedback on that as I can play with things like the talent tree through Wowhead and other websites. But no, my opinion is that I don't think they've gone too far with class changes. I actually think they're doing the right thing for the short-term and long-term health of the game, and the player base as a whole just needs to stop being change-averse. I know change is tough, I know change is weird, and the last thing you want is stressful stuff to manage in your hobbies, but frankly, stress comes from all sources. You're just gonna have to fucking deal with it and kind of get over yourselves a little bit. I've seen a lot of arrogance around this. People are like, oh, I'm canceling my sub. Goodbye. Nobody hates WoW more than former WoW players. Let's be real. So that is my thoughts kind of overall. I know it was a little bit of a ranty video, but I wanted to get my thoughts out on this. I'm going to be doing another one on add-ons once I kind of get my thoughts a little bit more concrete on those. I'm conflicted when it comes to add-ons. I think that I approve of the things that they're doing in concept. I want to see them more in practice, but then I have major concerns about accessibility and what they're stripping away from accessibility. And there's a very popular Reddit thread going on right now on r/WoW and r/competitive, I think, that was posted by Megaset and Geddon of the guild leader for Undaunted. I think we should all check out and continue to voice support for, even if you don't have any accessibility issues in the game. But there are other things about the add-on war, so to speak, that I want to kind of come to my own conclusions on, and then I'll speak about those later. So let me know what you think. Did Blizzard go too far with class changes in your opinion? Now, again, individual specs, I think I absolutely will say yes and no to, but on the whole, do you think this approach to dialing back classes in the way that they have, so that there's not, 20 buffs to track in a single spec and maybe only like 2 or 3, and putting more impact into the core gameplay loops versus what we are facing right now in the War Within Season 3? What do you prefer? What do you think? Let me know, and I'll see you in the next video. Hope you all stay safe, enjoy yourself, you're having fun, and you keep on gaming. Appreciate the time.